All right, what's up, y'all, and welcome back to the Michael Experience Podcast. I am your orator and originator, Michael, and these are my thoughts on my life, my way. All right, first and foremost, thank you all for joining me for this really deep and immersive experience into what I consider hard truths, and especially given that the subject matter can be very sensitive at times, and I want to make sure that I am at least giving some credence and some acknowledgement to that these can be very deep conversations, and walking away from them can feel very jarring, especially as you sift through your own situations and try to figure out how this plays a part. So my hope is that this is bringing clarity and light to your situation, and as I always say, I hope that it makes someone feel seen, heard, and understood, and less alone in a situation. So as we continue the hard truths, let me say this. The last episode, I talked about my father, and I did not expect it to be a full episode about my relationship or lack thereof with my father. But once I started the conversation, it kind of just took on a life of its own. And I think that's the beauty in the healing journey, is that once you start, it just hopefully takes on its very own thing, and becomes something greater than what you thought. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that that was the conversation, and I really didn't expect it to, but I'm glad that it did happen that way. So I wanted to come back and talk about my mother growing up and what that meant to me. And there are some hard truths in that too. So, to recap a little bit, grew up in a small town, father's family from Birmingham, Alabama, mother's family from Indiana. And so, my mom to me is a very intricate, very deep conversation and level of relationship, just in every way that it possibly can be, filled with every type of emotion imaginable. And I love my mom immensely, and I mean immensely. Words probably can't even describe how much I love the woman that she is. So let me kind of take us back to some of my earlier moments with my mother. So, my childhood, if I could describe it to you, has been a just journey of ups and downs and winding roads and in and outs and all kinds of things. But it has been such a diverse series of experiences that I almost would say that I would not trade for anything, but that would almost not be the truth. There are some things that I would have been like, well, maybe not that, but in its entirety, I wouldn't trade. So growing up, I saw my mom as kind of this very, very strong, very gorgeous woman. And I love my mom's energy, is just the freaking best, always has been. And people always loved being around her. Now, I imagine that, the beauty in it for her always kept people around. And we've talked about that. So I'm sure that that has a lot to do with it. But her energy and just her personality is just so big too. But I just remember as a kid going a lot of different places with my mom, and we've lived several places throughout the states. And I was happy that I got to see the world in such an expansive way. Like, we lived in Colorado, we lived in Wyoming, we lived in Birmingham. We've traveled to some places. I remember, I don't know where this was, but I remember, like, I was a kid and we were at this carnival or something of some sort. But I remember it mostly because there's like there's this ride that has like swings. It looks like a big like swing, so to speak. And I remember getting in that, and when it started, spinning around, of course the swing extends out, but there was like a lake or some body of water, and it was at night. And I just remember being up there and just being like, "Oh my God, this is the most amazing experience." And the guy, I believe, that was either operating the ride, or I can't remember if he was operating the ride or something or another. I can't remember. But there was a guy that allowed me to just do and ride everything the whole night. So maybe he wasn't the ride operator. I don't know. Memory's a little hazy on that part. But I just remember this one ride. I rode it like several times. And I remember the guy, we were there by ourselves, and the guy was like, "That's okay. We'll spin it again for your son or whatever." But I remember just that night playing games at this carnival. I remember, being able to just do whatever I wanted to do. And my mom just seemed to really love the fact that I was having fun. And I don't even know if I've shared this story with her. So this podcast episode will be her first time hearing it, and maybe she remembers, maybe she doesn't, but I don't know where this was, but I remember that ride particularly, and I remember that night just having the most amazing night that I could have, and I was really young, y'all, really young, maybe 7 or 8, I don't know, I was very young, but I always looked at my mom as kinda like this super badass, kick-ass superhero. I always looked at her that way, no matter what, no matter what. I would just see the way that she would walk into rooms, and if I may, I would see that men were just so, like, enamored by her, and even more so just watching her have conversations and watching her just be her and work her charm, and I just would be like, "Oh my god, this woman." You know what I mean? And there was just so many moments as a kid where I felt loved, especially those earlier years. I just felt loved, and I felt like no matter where we were in the world, I always knew that my mom would make it happen for me some kind of a way. I remember I got into Ninja Turtles really, really, we were in Wyoming at this point, but, Cheyenne, Wyoming. But I had gotten into Ninja Turtles, and I really, really love Ninja Turtles, and so my mom, I don't know how, I don't know, I can't remember everything, but I remember her getting me the set. There was a set where there was a tent and there was a sleeping bag and all of the accoutrements that went with it. There was like the truck, the turtle truck, and my mom literally got me everything that had to do with the Ninja Turtles, and so I loved I just love the fact that she did that. That's another one that I don't think I shared with her, but she probably remembers because for a long time my nickname was Ninja Turtle. My aunt, one of my great aunts, still calls me Ninja Turtle to this day. She was like, "I can't call you that because you're grown now." And I'm like, "No," because it brings back so many fond memories. And so my earliest moments with my mom felt like love, and it felt like the world was truly just my oyster and stuff like that, and then I just got to see her in the most loving way. Um, Let me speed us up maybe a few years so that I can kind of bring us to, um, 9 or 10, because I talked about my father and that being my earliest kind of, um cognitive memory, I guess, with how I felt about my father, 9 or 10. So I'll bring us up a few years to that with my mother, and that places us in Indiana at this point. And so I will say, let me do this. Let me draw this parallel. So I mentioned in the previous episode about my father that my mother would say, "Come and get the telephone and talk to your dad. Come and get the telephone and talk to your dad." At that particular point in my life, I was surrounded by my siblings. So, if I can say, my siblings weren't around me the earlier part of every all of these other things I'm telling you. They weren't around me at that point. They came somewhere around this later 9, 10, somewhere around that part or whatever. I knew who they were because they're both older than me. I knew who my siblings were, but my siblings lived with my great grandparents, and they were their babies, and I just was my mom's baby for a long time, but I knew who they were, but I wasn't with them every day. And so now we're in Indiana, and it's the three of us, and we're now navigating, my father and what that looks like at this point. And my mother is with a new guy who I hated, by the way. You know what I mean? Now, I know you shouldn't say that you hate people, but I actually hated this guy. He just was all around bad guy. And he just was all around bad guy. I mean, the worst in my opinion. But so she has this guy who ended up being her husband at some point. They're divorced now, thank God. But we're here. And now my life has gone from just being me and her to now I have my siblings, and now I have, this guy that is here that she is madly in love with, but I just cannot stand. And now we're navigating my dad and all those things. But if I may be honest, this time of my life was beginning to be very tumultuous because the truth, and this is here we go with the hard part of the truth, is that the guy that my mom started with was a drug dealer. He was a drug dealer turned drug user at some point, and it became very apparent when the drug use started, because things no longer felt easy. Things no longer felt like they were um in control, and in a way, well, maybe not in control, but structured. The structure kind of fell, and caved in, up under our feet. And so I knew something was happening, I just didn't know what. Because what to me at first seemed like stability, he was adorning and he was pretending like, and I knew he didn't love me. I knew he didn't love me, but he was adorning her, and because he was adorning her, he was adorning, me, and going through the motions. And but that can only last for so long. But I think when the drug use really took hold, that's when the veil dropped, and that's when the pretenses that he was keeping up dropped, and the true character became, known. And he didn't care about me. You could tell. I already knew that before. I already knew he was faking. Kids, I don't know. We just have this sixth sense, I suppose, or maybe it's just me. I don't know, because I've always been very enlightened in that way. But I could tell that I was like, oh, here we go. But then I started noticing the change in her. And I was like, well, what is this change in her? And so I watched her go from this vibrant person that I feel like could take on the world, and that, could do all of these wonderful things, and showed me great diversity, for the majority of my childhood. And I started watching this woman kind of shrink, and and mute in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways that did not feel good for me and my emotional, mental, and physical safety around this person. And so that is kind of the as I said, what I was realizing about my father, um on the parallel, but also simultaneously that happening for my mother too. The difference being I had always been around my mother, and I already had this great feeling of connection and, adornment for her. And so I didn't understand what was happening. I was like, this woman that has always been so boisterous and so brazen and just such a beauty, like, you're allowing this turd of a man to, shrink you. And I just was like, I'm like, I felt like the kid that was like, Mom, wake up. Like, Mom, wake up. And she just wasn't waking up, is what it felt like. And so over the course of, the rest of my childhood into my teen years, I just saw it get worse and worse. I saw her be more docile. I saw her engage, in life in ways that I was like, I would have never thought that this superhero that, I admired, I would have never thought that she would allow that to happen. And so that did something to me. I mean, obviously, it made me not like the gentleman more, but it made me wonder how my mother's spirit had gotten broken so much to where she wasn't saying the things that I would think she would say, in the face of adversity, or in the face of things that she didn't know was right. And it was like, well, how could you let this happen? Like, and it just became a cycle of trying to, in my mind, balance this person that I felt, not that I just knew, but this person that I felt so strongly, so deeply for so long, and this person that I'm experiencing now. It almost feel like it felt like I was getting to know different people. And it wasn't until like I was probably 16 or 17 that I started really trying to examine the duality and understanding what was really happening. But I was probably like 16 or 17 when I finally was like, you allowed this person to change you. And instead of fighting back or letting this person go and trusting yourself, you allowed them to control you. And I think at that age, that is what I was doing because I always felt like my mother was capable of so much more. And I felt like her spirit was much bigger than settling in a small town with this turd. I don't know why I keep calling him a turd. It just seems to be fitting for him. And I just was like, she's just capable of so much more. Like, why is she settling? Why is she allowing this guy to do these things? And so, in that, without going too far into it, right? There's drugs, there's drug use, there's people around, and that environment just was toxic. And I don't want to make this about the salaciousness of having your child around the things and stuff like that. But I did want to at least paint a picture. The important part of this is that you understand the context of what I will be discussing through the rest of this episode. So brace yourselves for a second. But this is the hard truths of it. And so when you wake up every morning and there's drug use around you and there's the effects of drug use. And so some days that looked like waking up to the house being completely destroyed, because the substances cause people to act in a certain way. So you may wake up with that. You may wake up and see the person that you love the most battered and bruised. You may wake up and see that things in the house just come up missing because they were used to, sustain somebody's habit. You may wake up with remnants of a party or a gathering. You may wake up with that strode about. So that is the lens in which I navigated my early adolescence and the feelings that I would feel for the duration. And so when I talk to people about how I grew up, I always say that every day I didn't know what I was going to wake up to. And I honestly feel like it was like a war zone because I didn't know what the day was going to begin with and I didn't know what the day was going to end with. So, with that, I will just say that every day, every week was different. And the weekends were just terrible, depending on what weekend it would be. It would be like Russian roulette to see if it was going to be a good weekend or a bad weekend. But I liken that to being in a war zone because it wasn't good, and you're just waiting for the next bomb to drop. You're waiting for the next thing to happen, and it makes you, stay constantly on guard. And in my mind, as a child, you shouldn't have to be that, but you are, or at least I was. And so reconciling the fact that my mom is here and she's supposed to protect me and she's supposed to keep these things away from me. So I thought, it was very hard. It was very, very hard. And there were so many moments that I could see the woman that I knew from the start, from what I can say is the start. There were so many moments I would see the mom that I felt and I knew very early on. And she would show up and she would say certain things and she would show up and she would do certain things. And I'm like, okay, well, she's still there. She's not completely gone. She's still there. But largely it would be overshadowed by the other thing. And for a very long time, I blamed him for, her dimming her light and her demise. And I think in some ways there can be some accountability and some ownership placed there. But I had to get to a place at some point where I realized that, she was a person just like he was a person, and that she would have to own her piece in it too, and that it was unfair for me to make someone else's actions or reactions another person's responsibility. And that's hard too, because you don't want to have to say my mom did this to me or my mom allowed this to happen. But the truth in it, the hard truth in it is that, yeah, she was complicit in the environment and therefore complicit in the effects that it had on me long term. And so I say this stuff not to disparage my mother and the lack of whatever she had at that particular time, but it is to provide context to how that would affect my life moving forward. So there were a lot of lessons that I learned simply because of her mistakes. And the good thing is that I had a very good gauge for what was in my mind right and wrong and what should or should not happen. And so with that, um, sometimes her mistakes became my lessons and my don't do or my do different, you know, the way that I would see, people in the home and, what that level of partying looked like. I quickly said that that would not be me. I was like, yeah, that won't be me. I won't allow that in my space. Absolutely not. There were certain friends that I would see and I would say, okay, I definitely am not going to have that dynamic. But dating as well, right? Dating for me, um, the mistakes informed how I moved through the world. Now, I didn't know at that particular time that I would be dating men later on down the road, but I just knew that I did not want the abusive dynamic. I didn't want the fighting. I didn't want the after the fight chasing after somebody who caused me great distress. I knew that I didn't want that. I knew I didn't want that. And I knew that I didn't want to be in a situation where I was inflicting physical, emotional, pain on anybody else. I was like, I do not want that. From the not being able to have the basic things in life, because somebody wants to control it. I'm not doing that. I was like, I'm not doing that. I won't accept that from anybody. So I learned a lot in the ways of just watching and interpreting. One of the things that I vowed was that I would never shrink myself for anybody else. And I think that has been very important for me throughout my life is that knowing who I am and knowing what I feel is more important than upholding a mantle for how someone else, may think or feel or express themselves. I am always going to be me. And whatever that means in terms of people, places, or things that I'm not able to be in, whatever it means in terms of that, they will just have to be it. But through this, I learned that you have to be you and you have to be solid in that. And even looking back on everything with my mother, I think that has to be one of the biggest lessons and takeaways that I have. And it has carried me throughout every part of my journey. And so there have been moments where I get into certain spaces and people are, pressuring and people are, trying to make me fit in a certain mold. And I am reminded that you have to be you because the experience growing up taught me that if I allow someone else to control, if I allow someone else to make me feel or dim or whatever and deviate from who I know myself to be, that this is what it can end in. Because I definitely felt like, again, my mom was capable of so much more and that she could have really taken on the world, but for whatever reason was okay with, you know, being whatever that was. And so that has been a very valuable lesson that has carried me even to this day, is that I'm fearless when it comes to voicing my opinion and my thoughts. I'm very fearless when it comes to moving about the world. And I'm very fearless when it's like, okay, it's time to do something. It's time to do something different because it's what I admired at the very core of my mother's characteristics. And when I saw that, she was in a space where she wasn't that anymore, I saw the negative effects of it. I saw her not being as vibrant. I saw her not getting out into the world. I saw her not having that same zest and that twinkle in her eye, the confidence being depleted. I saw all of that. And so the lesson may not have looked the way that I wanted it to. I would have loved for it to be packaged pretty and, served on a platter, you know what I mean? But that just wasn't um the message, and that wasn't the path I was supposed to go down. And as an adult, blame isn't really my thing. There are a lot of people that would listen to this and say, "Oh my God, I can only imagine what that would mean. How could a mother? I would never as a mother." I always say to people that we are all the sum of our experiences and thus our limitations. And so when I think about where she was in her journey and where she was in her life, right? She was truly the sum of her experiences. She was, but the extent of her experiences were also her limitations. And it would be less beneficial for me to hold her to what everybody else had going on. Similarly to what I said about my father. Well, it over here it looks like this, and over there it looks like this, and this is how it's supposed to look. And I have just realized and resided in the fact that this was just what my path was supposed to look like, and this was the way in which I was supposed to get the lesson. And even though outwardly it seems bad, it seems bad. I don't know who I would have been without all of the cumulative lessons that I had. And there were definitely moments that my mother sat me down and said, like, "Do as I say and not as I do." She said it. And then there were also moments that I felt it while she was living it. That was just kinda like it was the looks at certain moments. It was, the silence at maybe the breakfast table, or, the moments where we would be out in the world and, she would just do something a little bit extra to kinda let me know, what should be or what could be. So it's one of those things in life that you take and you tuck them away for, I don't know, I guess I don't wouldn't say a rainy day, but just you tuck them away for future use. I guess that's the best way that I can put it. And they were just little reminders that there is a better way, and that even though in this moment I'm not showing you that, this is your seed and this is your glimmer of hope of when you do get to a space where you're able to curate your own, that you remember these things. And so I had a lot of those moments where I was like, okay, this is one of those, do as I say and not as I do kind of moments. And I've carried a lot of those. And again, my path today and the way I move through the world today, I don't know what this would be and what it would look like had I not had these experiences. And I think that's the beauty and the gift in coming out of the other side of that. I don't know if I would have been this very strong and outspoken person who's also very compassionate and very loving. I don't know if I would have been that person. I don't know if I would have been so well rounded to see the humanity in people, even when, they are being perceived to be at their worst or doing their worst in terms of behavior. I referenced the situation with my dad. Um, I don't know if I would be this person had this not been my upbringing. And I will not lie to you, there were so many times growing up that I was like, "God, I wish I was born into a rich family." I've sat back and I've been like, "You know what, God, if you woulda with this body that you put me in, with this mind that you gave me, why did you put me in there with a rich family? I could have been out in the world doing some amazing things by now and not having to fight so hard to get the things that I have." And then I sit back and I think, but what if you truly believe that we are all the sum of our experiences, right? What do you think, or who do you think you would have been had you been with that family? Because who's to say that you wouldn't have been born a complacent child and an entitled child? And would you have the humanity? And would you be able to walk into rooms and talk to any and everybody? And would you have this light that people just are drawn to? And would you have this voice that has such depth and such clarity and such emotion in it and such determination? Would you have this voice had you been born to those parents? And so in those moments, I think to myself, maybe I wouldn't be this person. And so what I'm saying that I want to give and represent, would it even be a possibility? And I'm like, maybe not. It doesn't stop me now, ladies, gentlemen, they, them, and pals. It doesn't stop me from wondering sometimes, like, but what if? But it does give me solace or maybe comfort in knowing that the way my journey has been formed and informed is the way that it was meant to, so that I could come and have conversations like this. What I know is that somebody has to go through it in order to help someone else to grow through it. And that is very, very powerful for me, because in a world where so many people are plagued by the same things, you know, the lack of support emotionally, mentally, psychologically growing up, people that are taught some of the same conventions and confinements that I was taught growing up, haven't been able to find a way to let it go. And they may not have the words, right? They may have the thoughts and the feelings, but somehow can't articulate it, or somehow don't see the other side of it reflected somewhere. Because the truth is too, a lot of people look at me and my life today and they're like, you just give me one of those silver spoon. You give me that you've never gone through anything. But they see the finished product. They see the finished product. No one really knows about all of the things that it took to get me here, all of the scars and what their significance is. And there are physical scars as well as mental and emotional scars. Nobody really knows how those came to be, because on the outside, he's got the house, he's got the car, he's got the presentation, he's handsome, he's, articulate and intelligent. Like, oh my God. Most people look at me and think that I haven't gone through anything. If only they knew the whole story. I've given you all yet a glimpse of what years of my upbringing looks like. And so, if you can only imagine how much more expansive that can be and how deep that is from an emotional, and physical as well, because your body remembers things. I always tell people your body remembers things, but psychological aspect. If only people were privy to all of those moments or more of those moments, would they say that is something that I marvel at, and that is something I aspire to become when you see the finished product. And so I'm thankful in these moments that my parents are my parents because I don't see my mother for her mistakes. I want to be very clear about that. I don't see my mother for her mistakes. I don't see my mother for all the things that I feel like should have been or could have been growing up. I see her for what she gave to me in terms of perspective, in terms of lessons, either side, willful or unwillful, deliberate or non deliberate. I appreciate the lessons that she gave to me because I don't know if I would have the lessons had she not been my mother, right? And this is in no way to pacify what people would consider bad parentalship or subpar, or however people look at it outwardly. This is in no way pacifying that, but it is acknowledging that two things can exist at the same time, right? There can be instances where parents don't do their due diligence and maybe they don't show up in all the ways that the world would say they should, but also giving space for there still being love and there still being lessons and light, and even in the midst of, in spite of, but it's just giving credence that those two things can exist at the same time. And so what I'm very clear on is, even though it didn't look like it or seem like it, I knew my mother always loved me, and I knew even if she couldn't give it to me, she always wanted the best for me. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling, and now she would say it today if you asked her. She would say it today if you would ask her, and she would also, be very apologetic about what did or did not happen growing up, and, guilt and all that other stuff, but I don't wanna live in that space. I don't wanna live in that space. I believe we all make mistakes. I believe we all know what we know, and that we shouldn't be punished or penalized for what we didn't know. The only thing I would charge people to do today is to just be better versions of that. And when you go through things that are like that, how do you pay it forward? And so for me, this isn't just about giving you salacious bits. This isn't about just telling my business, as some people would say. It is about helping someone else out there redefine what it meant when they grew up, with maybe similar situations. Maybe it makes someone see something about their parents that they did not see. Maybe it shows that there is a path forward and a space for somebody to not be angry or not be bitter, and to be able to draw out those things that were good, even if it wasn't intended, even if it wasn't directed in that way from your parents to be good, that there was still some good in it. And so again, this story isn't meant to be salacious or to make people feel like, oh my God, I feel bad. I don't want you to feel bad. I don't want you to feel bad for me. I don't want you to be angry with my mother. I don't want you to be angry with your mother. What I want you to be able to do when you walk away from this conversation is to assess what it gave you, not what it took away from you. Because we can always be upset about something that we didn't get, something that we didn't have, and that can be our trajectory for the rest of our lives. What did it give you? What did it give you? Are you stronger because of it? Is your filter for nonsense greater because of it? Right? Are you more, immune to the fake charm that men or women try to place on you because of it? Are you a more analytical thinker because of it? Do you protect your children more because of it? Like, what does that look like for you? Because there is something. I know some people will want to live in that mad, angry, and sad space and say, no, there is nothing. I'm mad. I'm mad. I'm angry. There is something good that came out of it. Maybe you're a person that invites people into conversations more because you didn't feel invited. Maybe you work tirelessly to ensure that the environment around people is so comfortable so that they don't wake up feeling like they were in a war zone. Perhaps your ability to love and be compassionate to your partners in life is so much greater and feels so much better because you witnessed it in the opposite growing up. I can implore you and empower you today that there is something, if you went through something similar, tumultuous, there is something on the other side of it that you do get and that is meaningful and that is impactful. But you have to lean into that instead of all the I saw this person's life and kind of like I did. If I had a rich set of parents, it would have been this or that. My journey was meant to be my journey so that I could be doing this very thing today and hopefully inspiring somebody else. So, my hope is that in examining this hard truth, you all have been given license to examine yours. And if you've been mad at your mother for a long time and your father for a long time, and you feel like they didn't give me anything, I didn't learn nothing from them, and a lot of who I am has nothing to do with them. I want you to understand, like I said about my father, had he been in my life, had he been in my life, the person I am as a man probably wouldn't be. I may take more from the world than I'm willing to give if he was around. I may not be willing to explore, when my child says to me, Dad, this is what I think. Maybe I wouldn't be so empowered and emboldened to talk to other young men about my journey and women. Maybe if he was here, I wouldn't do that. Maybe I would take more. Maybe I would just not care about people. Maybe I would lie a lot. So I venture to say there is something about your situation too that it made you better because they weren't there, right? If it's like my dad, and then if they were there like my mom, there were so many lessons indirectly that I was able to decipher. There's so much of courage that I was able to build by seeing, less of it in her and in her situations. There is something there for all of us. And my hope is that you examine it today and find peace in it and find resolution in it because you are who you are today and who you are meant to be. And there are some parts of you right now that you are not willing to acknowledge or confront because you are stuck in the don't, didn't, shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and the everybody else had around me, that you are stopping yourself from being exactly who you are in your fullness. So my hope is that I've given you license to do so. I've given you words to curate and to hopefully expound on and then just live in the knowing now. And listen, ladies, gentlemen, they, them, gals, and pals, that does not mean that you have to invite those people back in. So if your situation mirrors in some way, or maybe your situation you feel like is worse than in some ways, you don't need people in your lives that don't add value, right? And you don't have to invite them in because somebody else told you that you should. You don't. And if you're struggling with letting, parents that were absent go, or, parents that are just constantly toxic, that's not my situation. But I know plenty of people who will not. Well, that's my mom. That's why I'm not gonna let go. I implore you to sit with yourself today and confront the hard truth and why. Why? Say it to yourself first. Affirm it for yourself first. Go through it, feel it, and then address the other hard truth. And it's the truth that I think we all typically know and we try to ignore. And that truth is what we should do next. So, thank you all for listening to the Michael Experience podcast. I appreciate the time today. And I will see you all on the next one. But remember, as I say, go out there and love on yourself before you go out there and try to love on somebody else. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace and love, y'all. Bye.